When I got into mind mapping a few years ago, I was blown away by how similar the concept of mind mapping was to the way my brain works. You start with a central idea, and from there you generate related ideas and simply connect them. For me, the biggest advantage was that you can easily grasp the whole picture because you have related ideas grouped together. You have a nice visual overview of the whole topic. Mind mapping was introduced by the British psychologist Tony BUZAN, and here's what he has to say about it. A mind map is a visual and graphic holistic thinking tool. Tony usually focuses very much on the visual and graphics part when he talks about mind mapping, and that's what it is. It is a visual tool to help you organize your thoughts, to help you brainstorm. I would have never imagined that something like mind mapping would be of interest for visually impaired users, let alone blind users, because of the focus on the visual side. Until last November. It was a regular working day. I came into the office. I first made some coffee, then opened the laptop, scrolled through the emails, and then I found this. Hi, I'm a visually impaired user of Apple products, and I'm wondering if your app works with VoiceOver. It was an email from Jessica. And my first reaction was, why? Why would you want to use something like mind mapping? How should this even work? Here's her answer. I'd like to write an autobiography and need a place to write down my ideas and construct chapters. Sounds like a perfectly normal use case. A way, write down your ideas and organize your thoughts. So this got me curious and interested, and I started to mail back and forth with Jessica. And in the end, we decided that we want to make MindNode accessible. And Jessica agreed to help us and give us feedback on our the state of accessibility in our app. And this is what brings me here today. Hi, my name is Matthias, and I work on MindNode for iOS, macOS, and watchOS. But this is not a talk about mind mapping. This is a talk about accessibility, and especially on the power of making your app accessible. I can imagine that there are different groups of people in here. Some of you might actually have never thought about making your app accessible. Some others might have thought about it, but there just was never enough time, or it wasn't really the focus that you want to do. And others might have actually made your app already accessible. So can I have a quick show of hands who in here has already used accessibility APIs? Oh, great. A few people. That's nice. So let's start with the most important question. Why should we care? I can think of several reasons why you want to add accessibility support to your app. First of all, it's pretty easy. You can get the basics done in a few hours, and I guess most of us in here have already wasted more hours on getting the animation just right than it would take to make your whole app accessible. It increases your user base. According to the WHO, there are currently 285 million visually impaired users in the world, 39 of them completely blind. Apple is really dedicated on accessibility, and it's very important for them to make their devices and software accessible. So it might even increase your chance of getting featured if you add accessibility to your app. And if that isn't enough, it also doubles down for UI testing, so you can use accessibility labels and identifiers to access your views for your UI tests. These are all good and valid reasons, but there's one more reason, which I think is the most important one. It's because it is the right thing to do. In this day and age, we as developers have the chance to change the life of millions of people out there, to improve their daily lives. I guess for us, the difference, whether we can use a smartphone or whether we can use a certain app, I mean, it's important for us, but in the end, it's a matter of convenience whether we can use this certain app or not. But for these people, it's downright life-changing, because when these devices empower them and give them a form of independence that they haven't had before, because it empowers them to do tasks on their own that they weren't able to do before. So I think we shouldn't only see it as a chance, we should even see it as our responsibility and obligation to do it, because in the end, our goal should be to offer an equal experience to all of our users, whether they have any disabilities or not. There are a lot of myths out there about accessibility, so let's break them down and contrast them with reality. Myth number one, this is a very common belief. visually impaired users are blind. Somehow we seem to implicitly assume the most extreme case, while in reality there's an entire spectrum starting from corrective lenses to complete blindness. And obviously all of the different groups have different needs. So partially sighted users have very different needs than completely blind users. And this is something to take in mind if you add accessibility support to your app. Myth number 2, visually impaired users access things sequentially. This is actually something that that blew me away when I first sat down with a blind user, because I was expecting the whole process to be very slow, and I was expecting her to simply swipe through the screen and access every element. But in fact, she was panning around the screen, and she had an incredible memory of location, and she used that memory of location just as we do. Once you know where the button to compose a new message is, you don't search for it on the whole screen, you go straight to that button and use it. And it's the same for visually impaired or blind users. Myth number 3, visually impaired users listen to all on-screen text. This is another lesson that you very quickly learn when you sit down with an actual user using Apple's accessibility technologies. Usually they have to turn down the speed of the voiceover so that you, as a sighted person, can actually hear it or understand it, because they have it at the highest speed. Just because it's all about efficiency. They want to be as efficient as possible. So they listen to just enough to orient themselves on screen. And this is why it's very important to keep the labels as short and descriptive as possible, because users, they don't want to read a book, they want to use your app. Well, maybe except you're the developer of the Kindle app, then they probably want to read a book, but that's a different story. So it's all about efficiency. They want to use your app as efficiently as possible, and you can do this by making your labels as short as possible. There's a wide range of accessibility technologies out there, starting from the most basic ones like localization, right to left language support for languages like Arabic, dynamic type to adjust the font size to the preference of your users, bold text to make the text stand out even more, and settings like reduced motion, reduced transparency, and all of that. All of that's very important, and you should really check it out. Well, today we're gonna focus on VoiceOver. I guess everyone in here knows what VoiceOver is. It's Apple's screen reader technology, and what it does is it turns your whole device into an input area, and it reads out what's under your finger. So, do you all have your iPhones with you? Yeah, let's take it out for a second, and I'm gonna show you the easiest way to enable VoiceOver on your device. Let's go into the Settings app, and then into General Accessibility, and scroll down all the way to the bottom. There you should find an entry called Accessibility Shortcut. And if you go in there and enable VoiceOver, now VoiceOver is always a triple click on your home button away. So you can activate VoiceOver with a triple click on the home button and deactivate it just as easily. So if you want to test a certain part of your app with VoiceOver enabled, you can just go there, triple click on the home button, enable VoiceOver, go through that part, and then disable it again. Well, I can hear that some people have enabled it successfully. That's good. So now that we know how to enable it, we should also know how to use a device with the VoiceOver enabled. The simplest gesture that you can use is a single tap on the screen, or you can also pan around with your finger on the screen. You might want to turn it off again and then play with it later. Triple click on your home button again. You cannot turn it off.
When I touch it, hear it.
All right. So you may have noticed this little black rectangle. This is the VoiceOver focus, and with a single tap on the screen, you can focus on a specific element, and VoiceOver will read out the content that's under your finger that you selected. But this content isn't activated yet, you just focused on it. If you actually want to activate it, so if you want to actually tap a button, you have to double tap. What usually happens if you first use a device with VoiceOver enabled as a sighted user, you try to double tap within that small little black rectangle. But imagine that you actually are blind and can't see that rectangle. It would be impossible to double tap within that small rectangle. So what VoiceOver does, it turns your whole screen surface into an input area. And once you focus on an element, you can double tap anywhere on screen to activate that element, which is way easier. Another important gesture is a simple swipe left or right, which moves the focus to the next or previous element. This is a pretty good way to explore the whole screen sequentially if you want to see or hear what's on screen currently and all the elements. Obviously, it's clear that the order of elements is important if you swipe through them in a special order. And usually it's pretty easy. If you have a table view or a collection view, moving the focus from one element to the next one will move it from one cell to another one. But once you have a more custom UI, for example, a two-dimensional canvas with mind maps on it, things start to get a little bit more complicated because you actually have to think about how you want to set the order of elements, how you want to force this two-dimensional visual structure into a sequential structure that makes sense to traverse through in a sequential order. A lot of apps have one most important action. For example, the phone app, it would be to take an incoming call. In the music app, it would be to start or stop music playback. What would it be in the camera app, for example? Exactly, taking a picture. So this most important action is optional, but you can access it with a two-finger double tap on the screen. It's also called the magic tap. And if your app has one of these actions supplied, you can trigger it that way. So yeah, we set out and wanted to improve things. And this is where UIAccessibility comes into play, which is Apple's framework that allows us to add accessibility information to our UI elements. And this accessibility information is then used by technologies like VoiceOver and other assistive technologies to help users with disabilities use your app. At the heart of UIAccessibility is an informal protocol on NSObject, which has several properties that you can use to specify your accessibility elements. For example, accessibilityLabel. If after the conference you go home and think back to the conference, think back to this talk, and you remember just one thing about this talk, make it this one. Because accessibilityLabel is the most important tool for us as developers that we can use to make our apps accessible. It's what VoiceOver reads out first when you focus on an element. And if you can remember myth number 2, visually impaired users don't listen to all on-screen text. They listen to just enough to orient themselves. So accessibilityLabel is read out first. So it's very important that the accessibilityLabel is descriptive, as short as possible, and concise. So like 90 to 95% of your labels in your app should be a single word or at most 2. If you have a button that creates a new document, simply call it add. If it's clear from the context that it adds a new document. If not, you can call it add document. Another thing to keep in mind is don't include the type of the control in the label. So don't call it add button, because the type of a control is encoded in the accessibility traits. And what VoiceOver does is it reads out the traits as well. So if you call it add button, it would read out add button button, which can get pretty annoying very quickly. Another important thing to do is to localize your accessibility labels. It doesn't help if we add the best and most concise accessibility labels if our users can't actually understand them. Not everyone is able to speak or read English or understand English, so make sure to translate and localize your accessibility labels. Speaking of localization, it's generally a good idea to localize your whole app, but sometimes you have specific terms that you don't want to translate or can't translate, like personal names or app names. AccessibilityLanguage is your friend here. You can specify the language, and VoiceOver will take the language into account when it reads out the text, so it will read it out in this language. For example, iCloud Drive. If you don't specify the accessibility language, this is how iCloud Drive sounds on a German device.
iCloud derive.
This is literally how the app name of the iCloud Drive app is spoken if you focus on it on the home screen. So we can do better by specifying accessibility language and make it actually sound how it should sound. Sometimes though it's just not feasible that you specify the accessibility language for every string in your app, because it could be depending on your localization workflow, or it could be part of a larger string that you can't easily decompose. So what else can you do? We've already heard this lesson in a previous talk today. Fake it till you make it. This is how we translated iCloud Drive, or the accessibility label for iCloud Drive, in our app for the German version. And this is how it sounds like.
iCloud Drive.
Not perfect, sounds kind of similar to my accent, I guess, but way better than iCloud Drive. Just make sure if you use tricks like this, that this string is only used for VoiceOver and not displayed somewhere in your app, because this could kind of confuse your users, I guess. So there are lots of other properties to check out on the informal protocol and as object. For example, accessibility hint is a more detailed description what actually happens if you interact with a control. So going back to the example of the add button, it could, for example, be creates a new document. Accessibility traits, we as sighted users, we skim the screen and we instantly recognize the type of the control. We have tint color. Back in the good old days, we even had borders around buttons to make them be more recognizable. But obviously, for visually impaired and blind users, it's not as easy. So this is where accessibility traits come into play. You can specify whether this control is a button, whether it is a headline, an image, search field, and stuff like that, so that these people know the type of the control. Sometimes, so usually if you have UI views, the accessibility frame is already set for you because you already have the frame of the view. Sometimes you might want to change it, or if you have a more complex shape of your control, you can even set a UI Bezier path on the accessibility path. And some controls like steppers and sliders don't only have a label, they also have a value. For example, you could have a slider that stands for speed, and then the label would be speed, and the value would be the speed, the actual value of the speed it's representing. So these were the properties on the informal protocol, and they only get you so far with the accessibility support. They help you to make your app accessible, but if you really want to take it one step further, this is a really great class. It's one of my favorites. UIAccessibilityCustomAction. You can think of it kind of like a context menu or right-click menu for your app. So you can specify actions on the controls that are currently in focus. So if you have documents in your app, for example, you can specify custom actions to edit the document title, to delete the document, to move the document somewhere. And if you specify these actions, what VoiceOver does, it first reads out the accessibility label again, then a slight pause, and then it says actions available. Swipe up or down to select the custom action. And then the user can swipe up or down and select this action and trigger it. So it's a great way to make your app more accessible, because this can make the difference between an app that's accessible and an app that is really great to use with VoiceOver. And this is what we want to do. This is another addition that was just recently added with iOS 10. So imagine that we as sighted users browse the web and go to a new website. We don't actually read the whole website top to bottom, left to right, or right to left, depending on your preference. We skim the website. We skim it for images that stand out, for headlines, for links, just to get an idea of the content of the website. Rotor is what enables the same kind of workflow for visually impaired and blind users. This is a menu that you can trigger on every screen of your app by just twisting your fingers and rotating them on the screen, and which will allow the user to select certain values. For example, on a website, you could select links, and then with swipe up and down, the user can skip through all the links on the website. So that's a great way that the user can get an idea of the content of your app. And new in iOS 10 is the CustomRotor, so you can specify your own content types for the accessibility rotor. For example, again, if you have a document picker with documents and folders in it, you can specify a custom rotor for folders so that the user can only swipe through all the folders and ignore the documents in between. All right, we added all these features that are part of the NS object protocol and custom actions, CustomRotor and stuff like that, and we felt pretty good about it until we sat down with an actual blind user and let her test our app. Boy, was it still broken. So you remember that I told you, if you remember only a single thing from this talk, make it accessibility label. Forget accessibility label, make it this one. If you add accessibility support to your app, please sit down with an actual visual impaired or blind user. Watch them, talk to them. Yeah, just look and watch how they are interacting with your app, because you're gonna find out things that you never even thought about that will happen. You can find bugs, you can find problems that you don't recognize when you're using the app, because we are sighted users. Even with VoiceOver enabled, we are still using the app different. So yeah, let's see what the current state of the app is. And let's pray for the demigods that it works. Or not. Okay, better. So let's enable VoiceOver on this device.
VoiceOver on. MindNode. Document sources. Button.
Okay,
Shows options to create or import documents. Landscape. Home button to the left.
unplug it.
Recently used documents. Button.
Or is it understandable for you, or no?
Document sources. Button. Shows options to create or import documents.
Well, should I continue?
This one. Oh,
Then I won't see the video.
Recently used documents. Button.
Unplug it and yeah. Static charge it properly. Yes, now we'll start this mirroring.
Okay. No audio.
MindNode. Heading.
Okay, I guess I'll just continue with it this way, or not.
Let's get Siri a mic. Try it.
Let's turn on the volume. Doesn't work that way. But once you plug that in, the sound is gone. Anyway. No, it doesn't work that way. Anyway, I guess no one was interested in the demo anyway. Let's continue with something way more fun. All right, so I'll just skip through my favorite part of the talk because now it's your time to work and I can just watch you. I have a challenge for you. So take out your iPhones again and make sure that you're on the first screen of Control Center. So show Control Center and make sure you're on the first screen of Control Center and take a look at that camera icon just to make it a little bit easier. And once you're there, make yourself familiar with the location of the camera icon and now turn on VoiceOver with a triple click on your home button. And once you've done that, use 3 fingers and make a triple click on the on your screen with 3 fingers. So 3-finger triple click. Don't freak out. If you succeeded, your screen should be now black so that you can't see anything. So now here's the challenge for you. Take a selfie. And we have like how much time do we have? For the rest of the talk, 5 minutes. Okay, so I'll give you like 2 minutes to take a selfie. And now it's but not like this, so without you seeing anything.